So that was a lot of questions we just asked you to consider. So let's ask you, Dave. Let's start with you. What do you think? Does technology have the capability or potential to usher in a new era of utopian society for us?
I think so. I think empirically you could look at the world right now, and certainly over the past 200 years, really over the past 50 or 60 years, there's been more progress in terms of most empirical measurements for what a good society would be than we've ever seen before, right? So the FinTech also has the ability to kind of usher in some of these changes that can make society even better, bring us closer together, hopefully help with issues of scarcity, financial inclusion. But I do think that there's a legitimate question about, can this happen in the existing structure with the businesses that we have today? So I guess to bring it, for those that are out there, one of the fundamental questions that people have been asking for decades now is, do businesses have a social responsibility, and should they be generating some good for society in some regard? Or is their responsibility simply to generate profits for shareholders? And I think this is kind of an underlying question that will determine the question of whether we can use technology to become a utopian society. So what do you think?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people nowadays think, oh, this is like a new movement where like, oh, we have ESG, so environment, social, and governance factors that kind of play into investors' mindsets and things like this, and this is somehow new. And I think what's important to point out is actually the debate around what the purpose of a company is, what the purpose of business should be, has been going on for at least a century, if not longer, about, should it be for shareholders or should we be focused on stakeholders? Should pursuing the profits solely be the focus, or should there be broader considerations? I think it's actually, in my opinion, it's actually quite settled now. Outside of some rare situations, there's no legal requirement to pursue solely profit maximization for most companies. Additionally, I think you have people, ostensibly someone like Larry Fink, who's the CEO of BlackRock, largest independent asset manager in the world, who by the very nature of the business that he does should be solely profit maximizing. But actually, the last few years, if you read these letters that he writes annually to CEOs, he's talking about the broader purpose of that businesses and companies have to society beyond just profit maximization.
And of course, there's Jamie Dimon, Warren Buffett, like they've all signed on to these kind of pledges to say the short-term maximization of profit or of share price, is not a good model. Yeah,
I think in practice, we've moved beyond if profit maximization is solely the sole purpose. I think there's a lot of academic discussion about it, but I think the reality is, if you talk to business leaders, if you talk to people who have thought about the issue, I think they all will clearly say, companies should pursue other things in addition to profitability. There should be a little bit more of a holistic perspective on how we approach this. So the real rub is, and how do you actually accomplish that, though?
Yeah,
that's the rub.
And not to disagree, but I think that is true, I think, academically, intellectually, but there are also very practical realities. I mean, actual lawsuits where shareholders did sue successfully, company executives, directors, whatever, of companies who utilized what the shareholders believed to be their funds, their profits, for some inherent social purpose, right? And so that is a reality. And so, and even when you and I have created this course, we've talked to people in the tech space, and in asking the question of who should be responsible for thinking about the utilization of these technologies, who should be, should technologists, should inventors actually be thinking about the positive and negative implications of their technology? I think the interesting and hopefully surprising response has been that they're not really thinking about that, right? Yeah. This is not part of most engineering courses or engineering programs. There typically aren't required ethics programs. I know, Stanford has recently created a computer science ethics program that I believe is now required.
Yeah, so they're trying to embed that into the curriculum. I think those are interesting points. I think on the lawsuit side, so there's obviously a lot of litigation, and usually for companies, usually some sort of shareholder dissent, and it's about like, we could have made more money if you had done this. But it's usually not the pursuit of profit that was the issue in those cases. It's usually there was some violation of a certain duty. And again, there are certain situations where company directors in particular are legally obligated to try to find the highest price possible. But that's actually less common than most people think, to be honest. I think to the interesting point, I think when people make new products, like new code, some new technology. The question about like what would the societal or ethical or whatever public policy impact of this be doesn't usually come until after the fact.
Yeah.
So the analogy that I think about is once you have a shiny new sports car, and it's in the garage, and you think about like, can I actually drive this? Would it be safe if I drove this? Those kind of questions are actually really important.
Yeah.
The reality is you're just going to drive it.
Yeah.
Because the temptation is just so high to say, hey, we just got to get this out there. This is so great.
Yeah.
And if you think about in the context of...
And drones would be one of these technologies that in this course we talked about where people just started using them.
Yeah. And so if we bring that full circle, if a company has invested so much money, capital, financial capital, human capital, time capital into producing their shiny equivalent of a shiny sports car, there's going to be a lot of pressure to roll it out.
Yeah.
Despite internally, there may be some enlightened folks who think, hey, we need to think about this before we do it. Right? And that's where the real tension comes in. Because I think everybody at that table will say, oh, this is an important thing to discuss, but let's just go out and either make money or whatever rationale they want to do, use to roll out the product.
Yeah.
And this is the real tension, because if you imagine hundreds, if not thousands of companies who are implementing these new technologies doing this across the world, you could end up in a really not so great place, right?